As an incident responder, more often than not, when responding to a security incident in a client environment, there tends to be a lack of security solutions available, such as an EDR or even centralized management. This makes it extremely difficult to scope out the actual incident, but more importantly, contain the assets that have been affected. Today, I want to introduce you to a tool that I use as my go to when an EDR does not exist, when I am involved in an incident response engagement, and that is Velociraptor. From their site, Velociraptor is an advanced digital forensics and incident response tool that enhances your visibility into your endpoints. It is free to use and extremely easy to set up as well. Velociraptor has the capability to provide enterprise-wide threat hunts as long as you have the resources to do so, and it can contain assets with just a click of a button. This is one of the main reasons why I tend to use this tool if an EDR is absent, because it has the responsive capabilities. Velociraptor uses what is called VQL, which can perform post-processing right in the tool itself. So you don't even need to export the results and perform your analysis using, let's say, Excel. But I won't lie, I still do this, but it's good to have nonetheless, and I'll show you. There are just so many capabilities that Velociraptor offers, and let's just jump right into the demo on how to set up Velociraptor, query systems, and run hunts. On my machine, I am using Ubuntu 22.04 with 16 gigs of RAM, but you could use 4 to 8 if you are simply testing, and 100 gigs of disk storage. If you plan on using Velociraptor in production, I highly recommend you put a ton of space in Velociraptor, such as 500 gigs to a terabyte, as it is super easy to fill up the space intentionally or accidentally. The first thing that I'll do is perform an update and an upgrade. So I'll type in sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get upgrade. Once you're on this page, you can go ahead and hit enter. Once you're done updating and upgrading your repositories, we can go ahead and start downloading Velociraptor. On their GitHub page, you want to expand the assets. And from here, depending on what your operating system for your server is, that is the one you want to select. In my example, because I am using Ubuntu, I will be selecting Linux. Do make sure you choose the correct architecture. In my case, it is AMD 64. So I will right click this and copy the link address. Heading back over to my Ubuntu machine, I will go ahead and type in wget, and then I'll paste in the link, and I'll hit enter. Once the file has been downloaded, we can type in ls to take a look and make sure it exists under our directory. Now we want to make sure that we change the permissions to execute it. We can do this by typing in chmod 764 and then type in the file. Now we can type in ls-la velociraptor, and now it has the executable flag. Before we run Velociraptor, let's create a new directory under /opt called Velociraptor. To do that, we'll type in sudo mkdir/opt/velociraptor. Now we can go ahead and begin generating our new configuration file. We can do that by running sudo./velociraptor config generate -i for interactive, and then I'll hit enter. You want to select the operating system that your server will be deployed on. Again, in our case, it is Linux, so I will select Linux. The path to the data store directory, the default is /opt/velociraptor, so that is what I'll be using. I'll be using a self-signed SSL, so I'll hit enter, and then the public DNS name for the master frontend. Now, because I'm not using DNS, I'm going to actually be using my IP address of Velociraptor, which in this case is 192.168.100.247. The clients will connect to the Velociraptor server using this IP or domain. The domain name must be accessible. The front end port, I'll leave it as default for 8000. The port for the GUI, I'll leave it as default as well, which is 8889. Would you like to use the registry to store the write-back files? I'll say no. Essentially, write-back files are used to keep client states. It helps keep the client ID consistent if you do happen to uninstall or reinstall Velociraptor. Are you using Google domains? Nope. And then the GUI username or email address to authorize. I'm going to go with the username. I'll type in MyDFIR and hit enter. I'll type in my trusty password here. Once I'm done, I'll go ahead and hit enter to end. Now I did have to resize the screen so you can see what I'm doing, but path to the logs directory, I'll leave it as default, which is /opt/Velociraptor logs. Hit enter. And here it's asking if you want to restrict VQL functionality on the server. I'm going to select yes, just because it's best practice, especially if you're sharing the server with other users. Now in your case, depending on your scenario, if you're just using it as a demo, you can hit N if you want. Where should I write the server config file? I'm going to put it into my Velociraptor directory that I created, server.config.yaml. And I will do the same for the client config as well. So that will be /opt Velociraptor, then client.config.yaml. And now we're done with the setup. So I'll go ahead and clear out my screen. And I will check if both our server and client YAML files exist. We can do this by typing in ls-la/opt/Velociraptor. And great, there they are. Now we do want to change one thing on our server configuration file to make sure that it points to our Velociraptor server. So let's go ahead and edit out that file. I'll type in sudo nano/opt Velociraptor server.config.yaml. Now what we are looking for is the GUI bind address. So we can scroll down and eventually we will see the GUI bind address. Currently it is set to 127.0.0.1. I'll go ahead and remove this and then type in my Velociraptor IP, which again is 192.168.100.247. And then I will go ahead and save this out by holding Ctrl X and Y to save and enter. Next, let's create a Debian package for our Velociraptor. And to do that, we'll type in sudo./Velociraptor-config. And then we want to point to our server config file. Again, that is in /opt Velociraptor server.config.yaml. Then type in Debian server, then --binary, and then we will point it back over to our Velociraptor file. Just like that. And then we'll hit enter. So now we just created our server package for Velociraptor. The next step is to install that package. We can install that using the command dpkg-i and then point it over to your Velociraptor Debian file. We'll hit enter to install it. Essentially, this creates a new group, system user, and a user called Velociraptor. A service is also created to automatically start as well anytime that you restart your server. We want to make sure that the directory Velociraptor has permissions for the user and group Velociraptor. Now we can check this by typing in ls-la/opt/Velociraptor. And as you can see, the user and the group is now Velociraptor. So that is perfect. I'll clear out the screen and then we can check the service as well. So systemctl, status, Velociraptor, and I'll hit tab for auto completion and then enter. So we can see that the status right now is active and running. Now we should be able to access our Velociraptor by typing in HTTPS with our Velociraptor IP with port 8889. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'll type in HTTPS 192.168.100.247 on port 8889. I'll click on advanced and hit proceed. Now we'll sign in with the user that we created and we are in Velociraptor. Now if we click on the magnifying glass, we notice that there are no clients. So let's go ahead and create a client so we can connect back over to our Velociraptor server. To create a client for Velociraptor, you want to download the latest file for the operating system of the client. Since I'll be using a Windows machine for my client, I will download the Windows executable on my Velociraptor server. So in my case, it is the 64-bit Windows executable file. I'm going to go ahead and copy the link. I'll clear out the screen, and then I'll perform another wget, and then I'll paste in the link. This will go out and download the Windows binary. I'll type in ls, and I can see that the .exe is there. Next, we want to create a newly repacked executable with the correct client configuration. In order to do that, we can type in sudo /Velociraptor. Make sure it is pointing to your Linux Velociraptor, and then type in config repack --exe to specify the executable. Now you want to point it to your Windows Velociraptor, just like so. Next, you want to point to your client configuration. If you recall, your client configuration was stored, or at least in my case, it's stored under /opt velociraptor client.config.yaml. And finally, we can name our new Velociraptor binary. I'll name it as MyDFIR Velociraptor.exe. Now if we type in ls, we should see the new binary called MyDFIR Velociraptor. We want to now transfer this over to our Windows client machine. And you can transfer using any method that is convenient to you, but I'll be using an HTTP server to do this using Python. I'll type in sudo python3 -m for module http.server on port 9999. Now my Velociraptor server is listening on port 9999. I'll head over to my Windows machine, and then I'll type in 192.168.100.247 on port 9999. And now I can go and download MyDFIR Velociraptor binary. I'll save this under my downloads. And in order to install Velociraptor, I'll open up a PowerShell administrative console. And then I'll change my directory under downloads. And we want to type in MyDFIR, or whatever your Velociraptor binary is, space service space install. And that is how you install Velociraptor. Now we can head over to Velociraptor's dashboard and then refresh the page or click on the magnifying glass again. Any clients that have been successfully enrolled will show a green indicator, which as we can see here. Now that we have our client checking in, we can start playing around with Velociraptor. I'll quickly go over the menu on the left, starting with Hunt Manager. And this will show you all of the hunts that were ran across your client machines. These hunts consist of what are called artifacts, aka actions that were instructed to be performed. Now you can add a hunt quite easily by hitting the plus icon at the top, and you can include or exclude certain clients to run the hunts against. For example, there's an include condition, so we can click on that, run everywhere, match by label or operating system. And of course, you can exclude as well. On the Select Artifacts tab at the bottom, here you can select the artifact or action that you want to perform on the client machine. And yes, there are a ton of artifacts, and you might be wondering, what do these artifacts do? You can find that answer by either clicking on one of them and read it on the right, or we can move on to the next option, which is View Artifact. Under View Artifacts, we'll have all of the artifacts that are on your server and ready to go. You can edit existing artifacts, or you can go ahead and create custom artifacts, or even pull in community created artifacts, making Velociraptor quite powerful. Now, I want you to imagine a new CVE that is being exploited, and there's a certain IOC related to that exploit. Well, you can create an artifact using VQL, which is Velociraptor's query language, to check if any of your hosts have that certain IOC, the indicator of compromise. If they do, you can either tag it and or contain it, whatever your process is. Next are server events. These are essentially events that occurred on your server that were generated over time. They're good for overall operational health. Then we have what are called server artifacts. Similar to artifacts, except that these focus strictly on the server side of things. For example, perhaps you wanted to perform some kind of enrichment. Velociraptor can go and do that. Or create flows to push data from Velociraptor into your SIM. Or even better, create an offline Velociraptor binary to collect data from client machines that are in air-gapped environments. The next are notebooks. This can be used however you want. Simply a place to put in notes or even VQL queries for post-processing. That way you and your team can easily just copy and paste. And lastly, we have users. Information about the user on the server itself. Now there is one thing to note. If you recall, I mentioned earlier about storage space, where more is better because Velociraptor can take up a lot of space either intentionally or accidentally. For example, if I were to run a hunt to download a file that is 100 megs, well, for one machine that is fine, but if your environment consists of, let's say, 500 machines, and that was done for all 500, that's 50 gigs. So just be mindful of the actions that you take and your storage. Let's head over to our client machine by hitting the magnifying glass and select the client. So I'll go to the top and then I'll select the client ID. Here we can see information about the machine. At the top, there is an option for interrogate. So I'll click on that. And this will essentially reach out to the client and grab information regarding its users, operating system, and network information. Next is VFS, or Virtual File System. Personally, it's my favorite feature. We can browse the file system of our client machine. Now let's pretend you have a client machine that has a malware binary located under the user's download folder, and you want to perform malware analysis. Well, we can actually retrieve that file by downloading it via VFS. I'll show you. So we can click on the auto directory here, and on the right hand side, we have a couple of options. The first one is refresh the directory, and then the other two are recursive refreshes. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and select refresh directory because I don't want to recursively refresh these directories as it can take a while. Once we refresh the directory, we can start expanding it via the left-hand side. I'll click on the C drive and then again, refresh, and then I'll go and expand the C drive, and now we have additional folders. Now remember, in our example scenario, we're looking for a malware found in the user's download directory. So I'll keep refreshing until we hit to the user's download directory. All right, now we can see a folder called mimicat_trunk. Let's head into that directory here. Now you might see that there's no data from here. Because this is the one that I'm interested in, I'm going to recursively refresh the directory. I'll go ahead and expand x64, and on this pane in the middle, you can see that there is an executable called youareawesome.exe. Now we can click on this, and then at the bottom, we can click on collect from client. This will essentially tell the client that we want to download the binary onto our machine. And once we do that, we can then perform malware analysis. So now we have this download button here. We can click on download, and it will download onto our machine. That's pretty cool, right? So that is VFS. Let's head back to our client by clicking on the magnifying glass. And the next option is collected. We'll go over here, and this will show us all of the actions or artifacts that were ran on the client itself. If you recall, I did select interrogate earlier, and we can see that output of interrogate. Now, do keep in mind, by default, it will show you up to 10 items. Now, we only have 9, so that's good. But if you wanted to see more than 10 items, you can go ahead and select either 25, 30, or 50. When we selected interrogate, in the background, it ran the artifact generic client info. So I'll go ahead and click on that. At the bottom, we have a nice overview of the status here, which is called state. And in this case, it was finished, and it took only 0.53 seconds. We also have a couple tabs that are quite self-explanatory. Let's select results to see the results of this artifact. We can immediately see information about our users that exist on this machine. And right underneath the tabs, there is a drop down that we can select. So there's users, basic information, and also Windows info. I want to show you how to perform an artifact collection. We can do this by clicking on the plus icon. Let's just say that I'm interested in processes that are currently running on a client machine. Perhaps a user called you and said that their computer is acting strange. Well, we can run an artifact to look at the running processes. So I'll search PS list, and then we want to select the operating system of interest. Our case is Windows, so I'll select that. And on the right, it will provide us with some details for this artifact. At the bottom, I'll click on configure parameters. And some artifacts will allow us to configure some options to be specific in our search, but I'll leave this as is. Next is specify resources. This is incredibly useful because if your client machine is, say, a CEO's machine or a sensitive machine that cannot afford downtime, we can set certain limits to restrict resources. I'll leave this as is and click on review because this is always a good idea to review your configuration and of course your resources if you specified them. Next, I'll click launch. This will execute automatically and will reach out to the client machine and retrieve data about the running processes on that machine. So we can go ahead and click on the artifact, and I'll click on artifact collection to see some of the stats here. And we can see that it took 2.92 seconds. That is pretty quick. And the state is finished. Now we'll head over to results to take a look. And we can see all of the information about running processes. It even includes the hash, which is great. So we can use that and throw it into VirusTotal, for example. Now, if we scroll all the way down, again, do keep in mind that by default, it only shows you 10 items. And we can change this by, again, clicking on either 25 items, 30, or 50. At the top, we can also export this out as a CSV file or even as a JSON file to analyze it in a different way. Or you can perform post-processing using VQL, which makes Velociraptor amazing. Simply click on Notebook, and then you want to click on the name of the artifact that you ran. So for me, it was system PS list, so I'll click on that. And then you'll see additional icons at the top. You can customize the column names if you wanted to and much more, but we are interested in the pencil icon. So this one can allow us to edit the cells. And here we can write some queries. Now, writing queries might be intimidating, especially if you've never done it before, but with practice, you'll become more confident. I want you to take a note of this limit 50 here. I'm going to remove that. That way there are no limits. And it is currently selecting everything from the source artifact PS list. Now, if you notice, some of the processes do not have a command line. I'm looking at the command line here. So example, this first process does not have a command line. Let's just say I am only interested in processes that do have a command line in them. I can type in where command line does not equal nothing. Case sensitivity matters here. Be sure that the field name is correct, and then you can hit save. Now, if we take a look, all of the processes with a command line is being displayed. I hope with this, you can see the power of post-processing. Now, let's pretend that this client machine is running a malicious executable. And the next step is to contain it. Well, Velociraptor has that capability to contain a host. We can do that in two ways, by running the quarantine artifact or by clicking an icon for quarantine. I'll show you via the icon. So we'll head over back to our client. We can click on the magnifying glass, click on the client ID, and right beside collected, there's actually another icon here called quarantine host. Now, if we click on that, it will say, hey, you're about to quarantine this host. While in quarantine, the host will not be able to communicate with any other network except for the Velociraptor server. And you can also add in a quarantine message as well. So this can be something like contact IT for more information. Before I click on yes, do it, let's do a ping on google.com-t. Now we can see that it's successful. I'll go ahead and click on quarantine. And now we can see that the pop-up showed contact IT for more information. And I lost connection to my machine. So we know for a fact that this worked. So if we take a look at our client, it automatically added a label called quarantine onto it. To basically revert it back, we can just simply select unquarantine host. So that's what I'll do. And just like that, we are back in business. Let me see if I can connect back to my machine here. And yeah, we got it here. We still have our box, contact IT for more information. I'll open up command prompt. And if I were to just close this one out, scroll up, we see general failures. And then when we reverted it, we got connection back. To perform a mass quarantine, I want to show you what you can do here. Heading back to our server, we can run what is called a hunt. So I'll select hunt and then hit the plus icon for a new hunt, and then I'll just type in mass containment because quarantine is too hard to spell. I'll select artifacts and then search for quarantine. Perfect. Select my OS. And then under configure parameters, these are the options that we can add or remove. Now we can select and type in the message box, exactly what we just did. And then we can go ahead and just hit launch. But the main difference between an artifact and a hunt is that the artifact will run automatically, whereas the hunt, it is currently paused. What you can do to start it is select the artifact itself and then select the start icon, which will run your hunt. Once you click on that, it will ask you, are you sure you want to run this hunt? Once you run it, then your hunt will execute. Now to revert your quarantine, you simply just need to type in revert containment, for example. Go back to your artifacts, search for quarantine, and then select configure parameters. And then all you need to do is check remove policy. And that's it. Hit launch and then start it. Now that you've seen how Velociraptor works and what it can do, it's easy to understand that why this is my go-to tool and for many others as well. So here is your action plan. Go and set up Velociraptor and play around. Review the available artifacts that exist and try it out yourself. Gain those practical hands-on experiences and don't forget to put it onto your portfolio. That is it for the video, and I hope you found it informative. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button and subscribe if you want to. Remember to stay curious and do things differently.